this guy, Alan Stansfield, sort of picked up the flag after Marty sort of did all these videos. He disappeared, and nobody really knows a whole lot about what he's up to or what he's doing. He disconnected from everybody in the ex-Scientology community. So one can only assume that he's been paid off financially by the church and went out in the worst possible way you could go out as a critic. And that's really too bad. But, lo and behold, Alonzo is the new torchbearer, and he has been posting articles on his blog, which is viewed by hardly anybody, and there's really not a whole lot of reason to talk about it except that I've been asked about it. So I thought I should address this whole thing really head on and sort of debunk this entire concept of an anti-Scientology cult. The idea that all of us are unified under any banner at all is just complete nonsense, as I'll go into in some detail here. The claims basically that are made about the critic community or the ex-Scientology or Scientology critic community is there's a few claims. Okay, first off, the claim is that there is no such thing as brainwashing, that is a fantasy, doesn't exist. There's no psychological or social science behind it of any kind, and how and it's just pseudoscience, and why do we talk about that? Let's see. Then we'll go through. I'll address these I'm going to go through all the claims first, and then I'm going to sort of take them on or get into debunking them. Critics talk in big generalities and exaggerations. We engage in a lot of hyperbole. Is the next assertion on this? This comes straight out of Marty Rathman's mouth, actually, and he accuses Mike and Leah of outright lying, exaggerating the facts, making false, claims about how bad Scientology is, the abuses in Scientology. Well, of course, having lived through it for 27 years myself, none of the claims that Leah and Mike have made are exaggerated. And if there were any real legal basis for Leah and Mike's show, The Scientology in the Aftermath, or even Going Clear, the film by Alex Gibney and the book by Lawrence Wright, if any of those works were demonstrably false in any way, then why would the Church of Scientology, with its unlimited legal fund, not sue for libel, slander, defamation? I mean, why not? They've got the money for it. They've certainly got the lawyers for it. Well, the truth is that the truth is on our side, and Scientology is not about to file any lawsuits against Leah or Mike or Alex Gibney or Lawrence Wright or any of those people. So, because they have no case. And that would be actually a fairly substantial sign of evidence that that all this talk is just so much talk. Another claim: the big critics, Leah, Mike, etc., censor any views that don't align with theirs. Impossible, but that's the claim. They accuse Scientology of what they are doing. Okay, well, that's just your back and forth ad hominem. They make out that there is nothing wrong with someone who has been in a cult. And by nothing wrong, I mean psychologically. Like there's no need for any kind of therapy, counseling, recovery. In fact, they ridicule the entire recovery process, make it out as though it's just so much hot air. Having lived through it myself, and I will talk about this more, that is horseshit, in a word. There has been a tremendous amount of work and recovery that I have done over the last 6 years, and I have been done many episodes here in the Sensibly Speaking podcast and other media that I put out that has made it very clear that there are a number of things that one must get through and recover from. But like I said, we'll go into more of that in some detail. They quote new religious movement academics as though they have any idea what they're talking about. I did a whole series here on this channel of what I call the Deconstructing Scientology series, and that was a chapter-by-chapter breakdown of an academic work on the Church of Scientology and its beliefs and practices. that was not put out by the Church of Scientology. It was an academic work. It was a compendium of papers that had been written by academics from all over the world, basically in support of the Church of Scientology. There were a couple articles or essays or papers that were in the book that were somewhat, acknowledged some of the controversy or acknowledged some of the problems with the belief system. But not one of the articles or essays took up any of the physical abuses or torture or, wrongful imprisonment or psychological abuse. I mean, all of that was just whitewashed and sort of ignored. And basically, the work might as well have been produced by Scientology because most of the academics, in an extreme display of laziness, simply took Scientology's promotional materials and used that as though it was God's given truth, and wrote academic papers, academic grade papers, touting Scientology's beliefs and tenets and as a good thing. And so I call these guys NRM or New Religious Movement academics because they refer to the Church of Scientology as a new religious movement. And that and other destructive cults are given a whole lot of air cover by these academics, speaking from their ivory towers, from their university positions. They don't know really much of anything about Scientology. They don't go do any Scientology. One of these academics actually tried to go get an auditing session and talked about that. But other than that, these people really have no idea what they're talking about, and they simply forward the church's propaganda. So to quote such academics is the height of intellectual dishonesty. And that's pretty much all I will say about that. Although you can refer to my entire series. I did hours of videos breaking down their arguments and showing why it is that each and every one of these academics was paid off, I don't know, was somehow cajoled, coerced, whatever, or they simply are delusional in the first place. And so they, sort of put these papers together about all this, and I broke all that down, and I'll put a link to the playlist of all of those videos in the show notes here for this episode. And finally, they assert that there is no such thing as manipulation or coercive persuasion, and this falls in with a no such thing as brainwashing. So first off, in terms of this no brainwashing claim, brainwashing is a term that comes out of the 1950s. It was first researched seriously by a man named Robert J. Lifton, who interviewed survivors of Chinese re-education camps coming out of the revolution in China in the 1950s, and he interviewed these people from the 50s and 60s. A lot more work has been done by other academics and researchers since then. And so in the 50s, there was this sort of fear, this sort of communist propaganda and paranoia about brainwashing and about a Manchurian candidate. And they even made that movie with Frank Sinatra, which was remade years later with Denzel Washington, called The Manchurian Candidate, where you could supposedly take somebody and put them through a series of abusive, torturous processes and implant in them the idea or command to, say, assassinate a political leader or somebody else of importance. And this Manchurian candidate would not even know that they were brainwashed, that this implanting had been done, and they would go and carry out the orders that they were given as though they were, mindless robotic automatons. Violate their moral code, violate their ethics, violate their upbringing, their education, etc. Well, turns out, no, that doesn't really exist as such. I mean, you can hypnotize people, you can get them to do things, so I shouldn't say it doesn't exist entirely, but it is a very, very difficult process, and it is not something that will work on 100% of the people. That is absolutely fact, that not everybody can be hypnotized, and not everybody who can be hypnotized can be made to violate their moral code or ethical codes or education or culture or whatever. It's a very, very specific group of people, and with very specific traits that can be hypnotized that deeply and be made to do things that they wouldn't otherwise normally do. So, yeah, brainwashing according to the paranoia of the 50s, yeah, that doesn't exist. But to think that there's no such thing as manipulation or control or coercive persuasion, I mean, okay, well, there is. You can lie to somebody in an attempt to manipulate them, and if they buy into your lies, they will act in an irrational way to the degree that they have bought into whatever lies you've told them. They're not operating on objective truth or reality, they're operating on the information you gave them. And if that information is faulty or wrong, then they can end up doing some pretty wild and crazy things. Very destructive and abusive things, even. So I don't think it really takes, me laying all of this out. This isn't rocket science, right? You can, just through lies, you can manipulate and distort a person's reality to the point that they will engage in wholly irrational behavior that they feel is wholly rational and justified because they're operating on this false or wrong information. That is how that's how destructive cults recruit people. That's how destructive cults manage and control people, is through deception and through coercive persuasion. They coerce a person so that there's an element of emotional or financial or physical blackmail, where a person who's in one of these destructive cult situations where they've bought into this belief system, it's an extremist belief system, they've bought into the code of conduct and the guidelines and the rules, and so they start operating as a cult member, and then they start thinking, maybe when one fine day they start having questions about what's going on, and they think, maybe this isn't really what I should be doing. But then, if they raise a voice in criticism or questioning, then the powers that be within the cult will start exerting pressure on them. That pressure is both peer pressure and authoritarian pressure, and the pressure is all in the direction of getting the person to see that they are wrong and the cult is right, and if they don't kowtow and start, towing the line, then shunning or disconnection is an ultimate price that could be paid. But there are lots of little prices that can be paid before you get to the shunning. It's not 0 to 60. There's a whole lot of in-between steps where a person will be made to do degrading or debasing physical labor, will be made to accused of wrongdoing. In Scientology, you are told that the only reason you're critical of Scientology at all is because of your own, what they call overt acts, your own sins, your own moral transgressions. And they assert this quite heavily, and they make you sit in a room and write down all of your moral transgressions or your overts for hours and days on end. I have been through that process, and I have made other people go through that process when I was in Scientology. So this isn't just some fanciful sort of imaginatory line I'm making up here. This is what we used to do. And that kind of pressure on a person, compounded with the belief system and the guidelines and all the rest of the thing that they've bought into, it's called milieu control. This goes back to Lifton again from the 50s, right? I even have his book back here. It's one of the books I have in my library. This milieu control, this control of the environment, is very, very important for a destructive cult to operate at all. So people can be pressured through all kinds of means and ends to kowtow and toe the line.